This is a live mic check. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
on the air.
All right, welcome to the first planning board meeting of the new year. The attendance looks very good. Wow, we have everybody. So first off, the minutes of the last meeting. Are there any issues?
I did find an issue,
Okay.
but I don't have my minutes. I can't find them.
That's an issue, but
It is. There's just one sentence where I think it needs to have a no in there instead of a. You have the minutes there? Sure. I wonder if I
Absolutely.
can find it very quickly. Details. There was something, and I can't find it, where you had a public hearing and it said there were comments. And I think it means, yeah, here.
there were no comments.
There were no comments or questions, and that's under 3, item 3, Margaret Jandal. Okay, down
Yeah,
the
there
third
was-
sentence up there. It should read, there were no comments or
Yeah,
questions.
I had the evening comments, so.
Okay.
Okay.
So I did provide some comments back to Patricia. She said she was going to update them and re-release them.
Okay, well, why don't we look at them next time then?
Okay.
Okay.
Okay? Very good. So we're going to skip approval of the minutes, and that brings us to the agenda. And we have everyone's favorite, 136 North Street.
Yeah.
So, I don't, this, actually, I believe this is just a reading of the finding of facts.
Right,
that
we agreed that
we
people would go by
we saw where
and
you
take a
parked
look.
your stuff, and it was fine.
Yep, I saw Brian's stuff, yeah.
Yeah.
And I didn't.
Oh, you didn't park your boat there?
That's another story. Yeah, okay, well, thank you. If you don't need to hear from me, I'm happy to sit and listen to you read the minutes. Thank you very much.
Okay.
No, there were no comments to me that anybody had any objections or
No,
anything.
no, it looked good.
No, but just for the record, the board didn't go and looked at the configuration, right? I mean, I did, I thought.
I did.
I thought two things. One, I thought it was a clever solution to a problem that had been harangued about for 3 meetings, so well done for the idea. And it was very effective for me,
Yeah.
Definitely worked.
so thanks.
And I think 25 feet is a good distance.
Yes,
It looked good.
Certainly
yes,
adequate.
Yeah.
25 seemed right. Okay. Well, this is an application, this is the findings of fact for the application of 136 North Street LLC, application number 181002, 136 North Street, Kennebunkport, Maine. The following site plan reviews pursuant to the Kennebunk Land Use Ordinance held on the 7th of November and public hearing, which was held on 5th of December, 2018. The Kennebunkport Planning Board makes the following findings of fact and conclusions and renders the following decisions subject to the conditions enumerated below. Findings of fact are as follows. 1, the applicant is 136 North Street LLC with a mailing address care of Brian Boschman, 146 Beechwood Avenue, Kennebunkport, Maine, 04046. Am I getting feedback? Is there?
I don't know what the sound is that's coming from.
just doing a sound check.
Oh, okay. 2, the property has a street address of 136 North Street, Kennebunkport, Maine, 04046, and is identified as map 13, block 1, lot 1 on the municipal tax assessor's maps. 3, the property is located in the free enterprise zone. 4, the applicant authorized Bruce M. Reed, Esquire, of the firm of Shepherd and Reed, 93 Main Street, Kennebunk, Maine, to act on his behalf with respect to this application. 5, the applicant has demonstrated a legal interest in the property by providing a warranty deed recorded in the York County Registry of Deeds, Book 17521, pages 664 through 665, on July 24, 2017. 6, the property comprises plus or minus 1.8 acres, with approximately 10% of the lot occupied by structures. 7, the lot is proposed for a conditional use as a boatyard. 8, in an application dated October 3rd, 2018, the applicant has applied to convert the previously existing trucking facility into a boatyard to be used for boat maintenance and repairs, storage, and brokerage. 9, Section 4.11 of the Land Use Ordinance, LUO, allows a boatyard use in the free enterprise zone subject to site plan review as long as the boatyard complies with the requirements of LUO Section 10. And the applicant proposes to utilize the 50-foot by 80-foot, 1.5-story metal commercial building with a concrete slab floor already existing on the property and is not planning on any new structures on the property. There are 2 bathrooms and a shower in the existing building. While the applicant will hire occasional subcontractors for some work, he does not expect to hire employees. 11, the applicant is unaware of any lead or asbestos in the building that requires abatement. 12, there is an on-site domestic wastewater disposal system consisting of a 7,500-gallon septic tank with access for plumbing and an approximately 10-foot by 30-foot disposal field on the adjacent lawn area. The applicant has provided a report from James Logan of Longview Partners, LLC, stating that there are no signs of past malfunction or hydraulic stress, and that it is adequate for the purposes proposed. 13, the applicant's work on boats may involve hazardous materials. For example, pressure washing can result in marine paint chips and wastewater, and other work can involve flammable substances. The applicant has a flammables cabinet on site to contain solvents such as acetone, paint thinners, and the like. The applicant will also construct a containment and washdown area that complies with the collection system, option A, described in the Maine Department of Environmental Protection Best Management Practices for Marinas and Boatyards. That's the MDEP BMPs. Disposal of effluents will also comply with the MDEP BMPs. 14, due to concerns regarding site distances for traffic at several parts of the complicated intersection at Arundel Road, North Street, and Walker's Lane, Townhouse Corners, the applicant placed a truck and a boat at the 75-foot setback of the intersections of North Street and Arundel Road, Walker's Lane, so that planning board members could ascertain for themselves whether there was serious interference with a motorist's vision approaching either of these intersections. 15, the applicant is planning to erect signs indicating the entrances and exits for vehicles onto and on the property. Parking spaces have been delineated, and traffic and parking guidelines of LUO 10.7.B.1 through 3 have been met. 16, the applicant is not planning any lighting additional to what already exists on the property. 17, the parking, loading, unloading, and work areas are indicated on the site plan. 18, in addition to the original site plan application package, the applicant provided these supplemental documents showing, inter alia, a current and revised site plan for reference showing the building, septic system, a 27-foot by 60-foot wash sediment containment area, the 10-foot buffer adjacent to the public roads, the 25-foot setbacks on the property closest to the public road intersections, 7 defined parking spaces, and the entrances and exits to the property. And B, relevant pages from the MDEP Boatyard Best Management Practices Manual and a description of the signage for entrances and exits on the property. 19, the applicant has requested no submission of performance waivers from the requirements of the Kennebunkport Land Use Ordinance. 20, pursuant to the requirements of 1010A of the Land Use Ordinance, Guidelines for Decisions, the Planning Board shall approve a site plan application unless it makes a negative ruling on one or more of the following identified findings which would otherwise compel denial. A, the proposed use meets the definition of specific requirements set forth in the Land Use Ordinance and will be in compliance with the applicable state or federal law. Finding, yes. Comment, the proposed use as a boatyard is allowed in LUO 4.11. The described activity satisfies the requirements of LUO 10.6. Especially, setbacks and signage will minimize interference with motorist sight distance at nearby intersections to the extent feasible. The applicant assured the board that the use would conform to MDEP BMPs during commercial activity. B, the proposed use will not create fire safety hazards and will provide adequate access to the site or to the buildings on the site for emergency vehicles. Finding yes. C, the proposed exterior lighting will not create hazards to motorists traveling on adjacent public streets, excuse me, and is adequate for the safety of occupants or users of the site. It will not damage the value and diminish the usability of adjacent properties. Finding yes. Comment, existing lighting only will be used. The provisions for buffers and on-site landscaping provide for adequate protection to neighboring properties from detrimental features of the development. Finding yes. E, the proposed use will not have a significant detrimental effect on the use and peaceful enjoyment of abutting property as a result of noise, vibrations, fumes, odor, dust, glare, or for other cause. Finding yes. Comment, the applicant expects to work primarily in the daytime and will follow MDEP BMP's guidelines. F, the provisions for vehicular loading and unloading and parking and for vehicular and pedestrian circulation on the site and, hold on, let me do that again. The provisions for vehicular loading and unloading and parking and for vehicular pedestrian circulation on the site and onto adjacent public streets will not create hazards to safety. Finding yes. Comment. Signage for entry and exit will be provided, as will be defined parking areas. G, the proposed use will not have a significant detrimental effect on the value of adjacent properties, which could be avoided by reasonable modification of the plan. Finding yes. Comment. Proposed commercial use is consistent with the neighborhood. H, the design of the site will not result in significant flood hazards or flood damage and is in conformance with applicable flood hazard protection requirements. Finding is yes. Adequate provision has been made for disposal of wastewater or solid waste and for prevention of ground or surface water contamination. Finding is yes. Comment. Applicant will use disposable measures consistent with standard containment and disposal guidelines described in MDEP BMPs. J, adequate provision will be made to control erosion or sedimentation. Finding yes. Comment. Adequate measures will be implemented to control erosion and runoff during use. Applicant advised the board he does not anticipate any issues with runoff. K, adequate provision has been made to handle stormwater runoff or other drainage problems on the site. Finding yes. L, the proposed water supply will meet the demands of the proposed use or for fire protection purposes. Finding yes. Comment, public water, no change from existing structure. M, adequate provision has been made for the transportation, storage, and disposal of hazardous substances and materials as defined by state law. Finding yes. Comment, a fire-rated cabinet will be used for flammable substances and MDEP BMP's guidelines will be followed for collection, storage, and disposal of hazardous substances. N, the proposed use will not cause unreasonable highway or public road congestion. Finding yes. Comment, the 25-foot setback at the perimeter of the property adjacent to North and Arundel Streets will not interfere with drivers' ability to observe intersection traffic. O, existing off-site ways and traffic facilities can safely and conveniently accommodate the increased traffic generated by the development as far away from the development as the effects of the development can be traced with reasonable accuracy. Finding, traffic is unlikely to be increased by the proposed use. Conclusions. Article 1010A of the Land Use Ordinance mandates that the Planning Board shall approve a site plan application unless it makes one or more identified findings that would otherwise compel denial. And as noted above, the board makes no such findings. Decision, the site plan application identified above is hereby approved. Conditions of approval, if any, pursuant to Article 1011 and 1012E. 1, the applicant pursuant to 1012E shall notify the planning board prior to the transfer of rights to construct an approved project. 2, the applicant must record a copy of this decision and provide proof of such recordation in the York County Registry of Deeds before any permit may issue or before any construction activity may commence. 3, the applicant shall comply with all terms and conditions of the Town of Kennebunkport ordinances, as well as the Maine DEP BMPs for boatyards. Dated January 2, 2019. Kennebunkport Planning Board.
Congratulations.
Thanks.
Okay. I'd like to move approval of those findings.
I'll second.
Okay, in favor? Okay,
Okay.
let's get it signed off. Now, the next one is a little interesting in that we just received the missing deed. So, which is great. We love it.
Yeah, yes,
So-
thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you,
Anyway,
appreciate
sorry.
it.
Item 181101, Kennebunk River Club, Eco Analysts, Authorized Agent, so.
Yeah, I want to apologize for not being able to explain that, because it turned out that we had just taken the materials from the 2009 application. And you, the board is now more diligent, and thank you for pointing that out.
From the bottom of your heart.
And it's a word to myself to not let it happen again, because it's not what I do, as you probably know, so,
All right.
and that's it.
Anyway, Larry has put together findings of fact. They have a requirement to provide this, so you've already satisfied the last requirement, but he's going to read them intact, so.
Yeah, you're going to hear about requirements that you've already satisfied, so.
Good stuff.
Extra credit.
That's right, thank you. So this is the Kennebunk Planning Board finding of fact and decision for the application of the Kennebunk River Club, application number 181101 for maintenance dredging of the Kennebunk River at 115 Ocean Avenue, Kennebunkport, 04046. So following a site plan review pursuant to the Kennebunkport Land Use Ordinance and a public hearing on December 19th, 2018, the Kennebunk Planning Board makes the following findings of fact and conclusions and renders the following decision subject to the conditions enumerated below. So the findings of fact are as follows. The details of the property and owner and applicant in this application are as follows. The owner is the Kennebunk River Club, with the mailing address of P.O. Box 994, Kennebunkport, 04046. The property address is 115 Ocean Avenue, Kennebunkport. The assessor's map, block, and lots is map 8, block 1, lot 11 and 23. It's the riverfront zone, and acreage involved is not applicable, it's dredging. So in a letter dated the 5th of October 2018, owner authorized Eco Analysts, Inc. to prepare an application for site plan review and to represent owner as applicant in this manner. The applicant is represented by Harold Brown, President, Eco Analysts, Inc., P.O. Box 224, Bath, Maine, 04530. The owner has demonstrated a legal interest in the map 8, block 1, lot 11 property by providing in the body of the application a copy of the quitclaim deed as recorded in York County Registry of Deeds, book 1623, pages 104 and 105, dated August 12, 1964. The owner has a legal interest in the map 8, block 1, lot 23, but must provide the full copy of the deed listed on Town of Kennebunkport Property Cards, book 3142, page 266, to the code enforcement prior to the issuance of any permits. In an application dated October 31st, 2018, the applicant proposes to dredge the Kennebunk River in the north and south basins at owner's property as indicated in the application. 7, The applicant has requested no submission or performance waivers from the requirements of the Kennebunkport Land Use Ordinance. Number 8, the applicant has requested Army Corps of Engineers approval to dispose of sediment at the Cape Arundel disposal site. Once approval has been received from the Corps of Engineers, approvals will be requested from the Maine Department of Environmental Protection. Work will be conducted during the winter months, sometime between November 2018 to March 2019, following the Corps of Engineers and Department of Marine Resources timing recommendations. 10. Pursuant to the requirements of Article 10.10.A of the Land Use Ordinance Guidelines for Decisions, the Planning Board shall approve a site plan application unless it makes a negative ruling on one or more of the following identified findings, which would otherwise compel denial. So, the proposed use meets the definition or specific requirements set forth in the Land Use Ordinance and will be in compliance with applicable state or federal laws. Yes? Finding is yes. Next, the proposed use will not create fire safety hazards and will not provide will provide adequate access to the site or to the buildings on the site for emergency vehicles. This is not applicable. Next, the proposed exterior lighting will not create hazards to motorists traveling on adjacent public streets and is adequate for safety of occupants or users of the site and will not damage the value or diminish the usability of adjacent properties. This is not applicable. Next, the provisions for buffers and on-site landscaping provide for adequate protection to neighboring properties from detrimental features of the development. This is not applicable. Next, the proposed use will not have a significant detrimental effect on the use and peaceful enjoyment of abutting properties as a result of noise, vibrations, fumes, odor, dust, glare, or other cause. Findings, yes. Next, the provisions for vehicular loading and unloading and parking and for vehicular and pedestrian circulation on the site and onto adjacent public streets will not create hazards to the safety. It's not applicable. Next, the proposed use will not have a significant detrimental effect on the value of adjacent properties, nor has a significant detrimental effect which could be avoided by reasonable modifications of the plan. Finding yes. Next, the design of the site will not result in significant flood hazards or flood damage and is in conformance with applicable flood hazard protection requirements. That's not applicable. Next, the adequate provision has been made for disposal of wastewater or solid waste and for the prevention of ground or surface water contamination. Yes. Next, the adequate provision has been made to control erosion or sedimentation. Yes. Next, the adequate provision has been made to handle stormwater runoff or other drainage problems on the site. That's not applicable. Next is the proposed water supply will meet the demands of the proposed use for fire protection purposes. Not applicable. Next, the adequate provision has been made for transportation, storage, and disposal of hazardous substances and materials as defined by state law. It's not applicable. Next, the proposed use will not have an adverse impact on significant scenic vistas or on significant wildlife habitat, nor will have such an impact that could be avoided by a reasonable modification of the plan. Finding is yes. Next, the proposed use will not cause unreasonable highway or public road congestion. Finding is yes. Next, the existing off-site ways and traffic facilities can safely and conveniently accommodate the increased traffic generated by the development as far away from the development as the effects of the development can be traced with reasonable accuracy. That's not applicable. So, number 9. When a proposed development will be located within the shoreland zone or resource protection zone, in addition to the requirements of the Kennebunkport Land Use Ordinance, Article 10, the townwide regulations in Article 6, performance standards for specific activities, and land uses in Article 7, approval of the development will also require that the board makes positive findings based on information presented that the proposed use first, will maintain safe and healthful conditions, finding yes, will not result in water pollution, erosion, or sedimentation to surface waters, finding yes. Will adequately provide for the disposal of all wastewater, finding not applicable. Will not have an adverse impact on spawning grounds, fish, aquatic life, birds, or other wildlife habitat, finding is yes. Next, will conserve shore cover and visual as well as actual points of access to inland and coastal waters, finding is yes. Will protect archaeological and historic resources as designated in the comprehensive plan, finding is not applicable. Will avoid problems associated with floodplain development and use, finding is yes. And is in conformance with the performance standards set forth in section 5.6 erosion and sediment control of the Kennebunkport land use ordinance, finding is yes. So the application is otherwise complete. Conclusions. Article 10.10.a of the land use ordinance mandates the planning board shall approve a site plan application unless it makes one or more identified findings that would otherwise compel denial, and as noted above, the board makes no such findings. So decision to site plan application identified above is approved. There's some conditions, which you've already met, I think. Anyway, I'll just read through them. The applicant pursuant to 10.12.e shall notify the planning board prior to the transfer of rights to construct an approved project. Number 2, the applicant must record a copy of this decision and provide proof of such recordation in the form of a copy thereof attested by the Register of Deeds before any permits may issue or before any construction activity may commence. Number 3, prior to any permits being issued by the town of Kennebunkport, the applicant shall obtain necessary approvals from the Corps of Engineers and the Department of Environmental Protection and any other state or local agency. Number 4, the applicant shall provide to the planning board the property card for parcel ID 8-1-23 and the complete deeds for parcels 8, 1, 11, and 23 prior to a permit being issued by the town of Kennebunkport. And last, the applicant shall comply with all terms and conditions of the Kennebunkport land and use ordinance as well as those of applicable state and municipal building codes in accordance with all the relevant federal, state, and local ordinances, acts, and regulations. Dated January 2nd, 2019. So.
Motion here?
I make a motion to approve the minutes.
I second.
Okay, all in favor? Okay,
Thank you.
so we've got some signing to do here.
Okay, all right.
So, I think we need to do a little bit of discussion on the next item, which is,
Ed, do you want to read it first? and
well,
then
let
discuss?
me introduce. It is 181-102 Sandy Pines Campground. And why don't you talk about your issue before, if he's gonna read that whole thing and then you're gonna tell him to delete half of it, that's not gonna work that well. So,
I'm not going to tell him to do
Okay.
It might be better if I read it.
It might be better if you read it through first.
Okay, read it.
And
Go
then-
for it. And he has water also, so we're
I'm
good.
gonna need it. Apologies in advance. Kennebunkport Planning Board findings of fact and decision on the application of Sandy Pines Campground, 277 Mills Road, Kennebunkport, Maine, 04046. Following site plan reviews pursuant to the Kennebunkport Land Use Ordinance held on 5 and 19 December 2018 and a public hearing held on 19 December 2018, the Kennebunkport Planning Board makes the following findings of fact and conclusions and renders the following decision, subject to the conditions enumerated below. Findings of fact are as follows. The applicant is Sandy Pines LLC, Sandy Pines or the applicant, with a mailing address of 2 Lovewell Drive, Suite 201, Kennebunk, Maine, 04043. The property has a street address of 277 Mills Road, Kennebunkport, Maine, 04046. The property is identified as map 32, block 1, lot 3, on the municipal tax assessor's maps. The property is located in the Goose Rock Zone, with a portion of the property in the Shoreland Zone, the 250-foot buffer, with Resource Protection Zone, coastal, and NWI wetlands. The applicant authorized Sebago Technics, Inc. of South Portland, Maine, to prepare the application and act as their agent for this matter in a letter dated 13 November 2018. The applicant was represented by Stephen G. Doe of Sebago Technics, along with Ralph Austin, Esquire, at the proceedings. The applicant has demonstrated a legal interest in the property by providing a quitclaim deed recorded in the York County Registry of Deeds, Book 17640, pages 501 to 503, on 9 January 2018. 7. The property comprises 26.25 acres, more or less, and it includes 300 campsites, a lodge/general store, about 4,100 square feet, a two-bedroom employee residence of about 880 square feet, and a guest swimming pool. 8. The property is legally non-conforming. A. The property's use as a campground predates the Kennebunkport Land Use Ordinance, LUO, which does not include campground as an allowed use in the Goose Rock Zone. As a legally non-conforming use, the seasonal campground use of the property may continue to exist but may not be expanded. See LUO Section 88A. Also, existing non-conforming use may not be changed to another non-conforming use unless the proposed use has no greater adverse impact on the subject and adjacent properties and resources than the former use, as determined by the Planning Board. See LUO Section 88C. B. Existing lot coverage in the shoreland zone is 43.5% per the site plans included with the application. This is above the 20% maximum required by Article 417A5 of the LUO. C. 76 RVs or camping trailers have historically remained on their campsites year-round. This is contrary to Article 73A3 of the LUO, which requires that no RV trailer or tent be allowed to remain in a campground on a permanent basis. D. The 100-foot setbacks and 25-foot visual screens required for campgrounds by Article 7.3C of the LUO are not met along some of the property's exterior lot lines. 9. In an application dated 15 November 2018, Sandy Pines proposes to make the following changes to the campground located on the property. A. Reconfiguration of the beach rosed area of the campground to accommodate RVs. B. Reconfiguration of the sandpiper area of the campground to allow drive-through access for large RVs. And C. Reconfiguration of the salt marsh area of the campsite to accommodate replacement of an older septic system. Specifics of the changes are provided in the site plans submitted by the applicant and described further in item 13 below. 10. This application presents the Planning Board with its first opportunity to review changes made to the property since approval of the applicant's previous application in April 2018. The Planning Board has the authority to determine whether the specific proposed site improvements and modifications contained within the applicant's application should be approved based on a review of the overall proposed use of the site as a whole. The Planning Board has the authority to consider in its review of this application whether the proposed use of the property as a whole constitutes an expansion of or a change to a non-conforming use. See LUO Sections 88C, 102A3, 104, and 1010-1A. 11. During the 19 December 2018 review meeting and in a follow-up letter dated 21 December 2018, the applicant affirmed to the board that the campground has been and will continue to be in compliance, with the 12 conditions attached by the board in approving the applicant's previous application in April 2018. Those conditions are restated below as conditions of approval of this application. 12. In addition to the site plan application package reviewed by the Planning Board on 5 December 2018, the applicant made the following supplemental submission. A, amended site plan, Sandy Pines Campground, supplemental submission, letter Stephen Doe to Planning Board, 10 December 2018, containing color plans to aid visualizing proposed changes, including roadways and driveways proposed to be added or removed. 13, in the application dated 15 November 2018, and as described in the site plans, the applicant proposes specifically the following. A, reconfiguration of the Beach Rose area of the campground to accommodate RVs. 1, existing sites currently used for glam tents would be modified to accommodate RV access. Glam tent sites would be removed from the Beach Rose area and relocated to the salt marsh and seagrass areas. 2, the landscaped center island would be reconfigured. 3, a driveway would be built through the center of the area to facilitate RV access. 4, existing Site 19 would be removed and revegetated. A new Site 19 would be established at a location in the Beach Rose area with an existing full hookup, electrical, water, and sewage pedestal. 5, sewer service would be added to 2 existing Beach Rose sites, number 17 and 18, by connecting them to the existing septic system. 6, 2 sites would be added, number 21 and 22, at locations in the Beach Rose area with existing full hookup pedestals. B, reconfiguration of the sandpiper area of the campground to allow drive-through access for large RVs. 1, an access driveway would be added and 3 existing RV sites modified to allow large RV drive-through access. And 2, 1 existing site, number 38, will be removed. C, reconfiguration of the salt marsh area of the campsite to accommodate replacement of an older septic system. 1, plans to replace an older septic system serving Bathhouse 5 calls for its septic field to be placed within the footprint of the existing driveway near the bathhouse. Because the replacement system design is raised in elevation compared to the older system, replacing the driveway over the new system would increase its grade, making vehicle access difficult. Instead, the applicant proposes to eliminate the driveway and place 2 new glam sites at this location, glam tent sites at this location. 2, existing Site 51 would be modified to accommodate these 2 new glam tents, 3 in total. The modified site, becoming Sites 51A through C, would be re-landscaped and a pedestrian access to the bathhouse added. 3, existing Sites 74 and 75 in the salt marsh area would be eliminated to keep the total number of campsites at 300. 4, a 10-foot by 200-foot gravel seating area would be added for the 4 glam tent sites, at Site 64 to 67. 5, revegetation and new impervious areas due to reconfiguration of the salt marsh area would result in no increase or decrease to shoreland zone lot coverage, maintaining the existing grandfathered 46.5% coverage nonconformance per site plan data. 6, permitting for the replacement septic system is handled by the Kennebunkport Code Enforcement Office and does not require planning board review. 14, per data supplied by the applicant, the proposed changes would reduce the total lot coverage by roads within the campground by 1,642 square feet, or 0.038 acres. In a prior application in April 2018, the planning board determined that under LUO 53A1 and 73A1, a maximum of 300 campsites were allowed in order to meet the required minimum of 5,000 square foot of total campground area per campsite, exclusive of roads, driveways, and wetlands. Since the total roadway coverage would not be increased by this proposal, the maximum number of campsites need not be reduced. 15. In the 15 November 2018 application, the applicant asked the board to consider delegating certain matters that currently require planning board review to the town's Director of Planning and Development. This request was discussed at the 5 December 2018 planning board meeting and subsequently withdrawn by the applicant in his 10 December letter to the board. See item 12A above. 16, the applicants have requested no submission or performance waivers from the requirements of the Kennebunkport Land Use Ordinance. 17, pursuant to the requirements of Article 1010A of the Land Use Ordinance, Guidelines for Decisions, the Planning Board shall approve a site plan application unless it makes a negative ruling on one or more of the following identified findings which would otherwise compel denial. A, the proposed use meets the definition or specific requirements set forth in the Land Use Ordinance and will be in compliance with applicable state or federal laws. Finding yes. Comments. The Board finds that, with the conditions of approval contained herein, the applicant's proposed project does not constitute an improper expansion of the legally existing nonconforming use of the property. The changes proposed by the applicant in its site plan application are modernization improvements to the facility which do not alter the essential character of the property as a campground. The Board also finds that the applicant's site plan application and associated improvements to the property do not constitute a change of the legally nonconforming campground use to another nonconforming use. The changes proposed by this application would not increase the property's nonconforming conditions, satisfying Article 8.1 of the LUO. The proposed changes would not expand the property's grandfathered use as a campground. 2, the proposed changes would not affect lot coverage in the shoreland zone. 3, the proposed changes would not affect the grandfathered maximum number of RVs or camping trailers that are left on site at the end of the season. And 4, the proposed changes would not affect the existing setback and visual buffer nonconformances. B, the proposed use will not create fire safety hazards, and will provide adequate access to the site or to the buildings on the site for emergency vehicles. Finding yes. Comments, none of the changes pose fire safety hazards or affect emergency vehicle access. C, the proposed interior lighting will not create hazards to motorists traveling on adjacent public streets and is adequate for the safety of occupants or users of the site and will not damage the value and diminish the usability of adjacent properties. Finding not applicable. Comments, no changes to exterior lighting are proposed. D, the provisions for buffers and on-site landscaping provide for adequate protection to neighboring properties from the detrimental features of the development. Finding yes. Comments, yes. Comments, appropriate on-site landscaping is shown on the site plans submitted by the applicant. E, the proposed use will not have a significant detrimental effect on the use and peaceful enjoyment of abutting property as a result of noise, vibrations, fumes, odor, dust, glare, or other cause. Finding yes. F, the provisions for vehicular loading and unloading and parking and for vehicular and pedestrian circulation on the site and onto adjacent public streets will not create hazards to safety. Finding yes. Comments, site plans include provisions for improved RV access and considerations for pedestrian traffic within the site. G, the proposed use will not have a significant detrimental effect on the value of adjacent properties, which could be avoided by reasonable modification of the plan. Finding yes, the proposed changes will not have a detrimental effect on the adjacent properties. H, the design of the site will not result in significant flood hazards or flood damage and is in conformance with applicable flood hazard protection requirements. Finding yes. Comments, none of the proposed changes are in the flood zone. I, adequate provision has been made for disposal of wastewater or solid waste and for the prevention of ground or surface water contamination. Finding yes. Adequate provision has been made to control erosion or sedimentation. Finding yes. Comments, erosion control measures are included as part of the site plans. K, adequate provision has been made to handle stormwater runoff or other drainage problems on the site. Finding not applicable. Comments, the proposed changes will not affect stormwater runoff. L, the proposed water supply will meet the demands of the proposed use or for fire protection purposes. Finding yes. Comments, the proposed changes will not have a significant effect on the water supply. M, adequate provision has been made for the transportation, storage, and disposal of hazardous materials and materials as defined by the hazardous substances and materials as defined by state law, finding not applicable. N, the proposed use will not have an adverse effect on significant scenic vistas or on significant wildlife habitat, nor will have such an impact that could be avoidable by reasonable modification of the plan. Finding yes, the proposed changes will not affect scenic vistas. O, the proposed use will not cause unreasonable highway or public road congestion. Finding yes, the proposed changes will not affect highway/public road ingress or egress. P, existing off-site ways and traffic facilities can safely and conveniently accommodate the increased traffic generated by the development as far away from the development as the effects of the development can be traced with reasonable accuracy. Finding yes, the proposed changes will not increase traffic. Item 18, when a proposed development will be located within the shoreland or resource protection zones, in addition to the requirements of the Kennebunkport Land Use Ordinance, Article 10, and townwide regulations in Article 6, the performance standards for specific activities and land uses in Article 7, approval of the development will also require that the board make positive findings based on the information presented that the proposed use, A, will maintain safe and healthful conditions, finding yes. B, will not result in water pollution, erosion, or sedimentation to surface waters, finding yes. Will adequately provide for the disposal of all wastewater, finding yes. Will not have an adverse impact on the spawning grounds, fish, aquatic life, bird, or other wildlife habitat, finding yes. The proposed changes will not substantially affect wildlife habitat. E, will conserve shore cover and visual, as well as actual points of access to inland and coastal waters, finding not applicable. The new 10 sites in the shoreland zone are in existing cleared areas and outside of the 75-foot high water mark. F, will protect archaeological and historic resources as designated in the comprehensive plan, finding not applicable. G, will avoid problems associated with floodplain development and use, finding yes. Comments, none of the proposed changes are in the flood zone. H, is in conformance with the performance standards set forth in Section 5.6 of the Kennebunkport Land Use Ordinance, finding yes. Comments, erosion control measures are included as part of the site plans submitted by the applicant. Conclusions. Article 1010A of the Land Use Ordinance mandates that the Planning Board shall approve a site plan application unless it makes one or more identified findings that would otherwise compel denial, and as noted above, the Board makes no such findings. Decision, the site plan application identified above is hereby approved. Conditions of approval, if any, pursuant to Article 10.11 and 10.12E. 1. Pursuant to Article 10.11, the Planning Board attaches the following conditions to the approval of this application. A. Sandy Pines Campground shall continue to operate as a seasonal campground, open for business only between 15 April and 15 October. B. The total number of campsites on the property shall not exceed 300. C. The number of seasonal campsites where RVs or camping trailers may remain unoccupied during the operating season shall be limited to a maximum of 76, none of which shall be located in a flood zone. D. All site work on the property shall be performed under best management practices, as described by these Maine Department of Environmental documents, and 3 are listed. E. Sandy Pines LLC shall use only organic fertilizers and pesticides and shall not use any fertilizers in the shoreland or resource protection zone areas. F. Sandy Pines LLC shall use native plants in the landscaping to the extent practical. G. Sandy Pines LLC shall inspect all septic systems on an annual basis at a minimum. Sandy Pines LLC shall maintain and clean the septic systems on a regular basis and provide copies of the inspection/cleaning records to the Code Enforcement Office. H. Sandy Pines LLC shall fund the Healthy Beaches water testing programs in Kennebunkport in the amount of at least $2,500 per year as long as that program exists. I, Sandy Pines LLC, shall not provide a transportation service for the purpose of shuttling campers to Goose Rocks Beach. J, Sandy Pines LLC shall erect barriers and signage restricting kayak launching to the location provided by the campground for that purpose. K, Sandy Pines LLC shall erect signage in the entry area asking vehicles awaiting registration to turn off their engines in order to minimize noise, fumes, and odor. L, in order to minimize disturbance to abutters, Sandy Pines LLC shall allow no electronically amplified music, for example, bands, karaoke, disc jockeys, from hosted activities and events after 10 p.m. 2, the applicant, pursuant to 10.12.e, shall notify the planning board prior to the transfer of rights to construct an approved project. 3, the applicant must record a copy of this decision and provide proof of such recordation in the York County Registry of Deeds before any permits may be issued or before any construction activity may commence. 4, the applicant shall comply with all the terms and conditions of the Town of Kennebunkport ordinances as well as the main DEP approvals, dated 2 January 2018. I made a correction in here to one typo as I was reading. I'll mark it.
Mark it.
Can you correct the date on the end of that too? You said 18, it should be 19.
Oh, my goodness. Thank you.
Yep, no problem.
I do that just so you know that a computer didn't generate this.
No, do you want to?
Ed and I already had a discussion a little bit by email about the procedure in this and the writing of the drafting of finding of fact. And it concerned me because it goes way back to a couple of other cases that we've had and jurisdictional issues. And I think that need clarification for the board. And if I can go through those very quickly, it'll tell you why I have problems a little bit with some of this. It's not that Ed didn't draft great findings of fact. I mean, that was a lot of work, and he did a great job. They're very clear, which is nice. But even before some of the members were on this board, we had an application come in for, was it the Masonic Lodge?
Yes.
And parking. Okay, and it turned out when you went back to an earlier application of theirs, they had been allotted so many parking spaces. And it turned out that they were over that by 5 anyway, over time. You know, they had too many. But the application came before the board asking for something else, asking for commercial parking, basically, so for payment for 5 parking spaces and so forth. And the board even debated then whether to go back to the original application and start looking at it. And this is not correct. You can't. You just can't. Once those findings of fact have been signed and once you've approved an application, the board's jurisdiction ends. It just ends right there. And the remaining jurisdiction basically is for the courts if it gets appealed, or if you need enforcement, for the code enforcement officer. And in talking to the Maine municipal attorney about this, he also pointed out that the board, by the way, may have a moral responsibility to point out to the code enforcement office that there are 5 spaces over. But it's for the code enforcement office to enforce that. And then we talked a little bit about another earlier application. I think most of you were here for that, and that was Tom McConey when he came in for an extension of time. And then again, the board started to go back to, well, do we look at the original application? We don't. Okay? The extension of time gets approved. You only look at the reasons for an extension and what you have in the LUO. You don't go back to an earlier application. And this is what led me to problems with what's in here. And part of it is that I write a lot of contracts. Okay, and going back to my contract writing, if I write an amendment to a contract, we want to add something to a contract over time, or a time extension or something like that, the only part of that contract we change in the amendment is the part you're going to change for time or to add another party or something like that. You never repeat the earlier contract sections. One, because it's so easy to make a mistake doing that, and two, because they're not relevant. They're absolutely irrelevant. And I feel the same way about this. This is a complicated case, and it was when we made a set of conditions, and it's a non-conforming use, and we had an application in 2018. We went through the LUO to make sure that the LUO conditions applied, and what didn't, we put in conditions for. Okay, so basically, when you look at this application, you're starting from the basis of the LUO and what was complied with there and the conditions. But you don't go back and you don't repeat those conditions, and you don't confuse them in the new application. And this is why I have a problem with repeating those conditions. I really do. One, you can make a mistake. All you have to do is say, and I want to point out in here, on section 11, where you put in, it will continue to be in compliance with the 12 conditions. Actually, that should be continue to be in compliance with the LUO and the conditions. Because it's not just the conditions you're in compliance with, it's section 8 as well, any part of that, and any part that's, that may be applicable. I have a problem with putting in those conditions because if you miss one, there's a question of, well, is it irrelevant? Is it not in effect anymore? I have a problem with putting in the conditions because if you're going to put in the conditions, then you're basically rewriting a contract. You have to put in the whole LUO and do that all over again. So that's where my concern comes in. And I think it obfuscates, I think it confuses the first application with the second application, and that's something we don't want to do. We want to show that we are working only on this new application, even though it's subject to the LUO and the other conditions. I think it's better to just say that the conditions of the first application remain in effect, and that's all you need to say there, rather than put them in there. So that's the problem I have, and I'm perfectly willing to approve it as is with the conditions in there if you want to, but it makes me uncomfortable.
Let me respond as to my thinking on this, because as Nina alluded in her remarks, we do typically, as a board, send out a draft of the findings of fact to the other board members, and we ask individually them to respond to the author. We don't have a meeting on it. But we did. Nina and I went back and forth a couple of times on this, and I did clean up some of the redundancy that Nina is
Yes, you did.
pointed out to me, and I do think it was an improved, clearer document as a result. I think the key here is that I agree that this application stands alone. But I included these conditions as approval. And when I'm writing a findings of fact, I don't feel like I'm writing a contract. I'm documenting what the board's findings and decision was. I'm not invalidating any prior application or findings or decisions of the board. These conditions are imposed on approval of this application, and they don't supersede or change the requirements that were previously levied on the application in April. I think what's important is that this is a very sensitive property in the Goose Rocks area. And we spent a lot of time thinking hard and soliciting public input on what would cause us to approve the continued use of this property as a campground. We decided that these 12 conditions were the essence of what allowed us to believe that it was still a grandfathered, non-conforming use and wasn't a change in use, it wasn't an expansion of use. And so, as a part of this application, we asked those questions again, and Steve was kind enough to answer the ones he could in real time, and he subsequently documented the ones that he had to go back and get a little bit of data on, and I've captured the fact that we did look at those. I asked the board if the answer had come back, one or more of those conditions were not being met. We decided it was hard, or there's some reason we couldn't do it. Would you have approved this application? And in my case, I believe the board would not have approved this application. This application was contingent on us believing that this non-conforming use isn't being expanded over its historic grandfathered use, and meeting those conditions was instrumental in my believing that it is. So I decided that we, as a board, had decided that meeting those conditions was a stipulation we wanted to put in the findings in order to approve this application. We're not negating anything that went on in the April. I think that in the April decision, I believe that stands alone. This doesn't supersede it. This application required, in my opinion, meeting those conditions in order for us to conclude that it wasn't an expansion of use.
No, it's not just the conditions. It's the requirements of the LUO plus the conditions that have to be met from the earlier application. And while you look at the conditions and say, is there any change that would negate the conditions, you also are looking at the LUO, because this is a new application. Mm-hmm. The earlier application stands as it is. It's in force. Mm-hmm. You don't make another set of conditions to look at, whether they be the same or different.
No, I don't.
And I have written judicial opinions when I worked for a federal judge, and I would not do that there either. I would not repeat conditions.
I don't believe we are repeating them. I believe we have revisited them. And I wanted to document that.
But you're not supposed to revisit them. They were in the first applications and set in the first application. You're not setting them again.
I beg to differ. What we did on this application, in my opinion, as we looked afresh, we looked at the specific changes that were being proposed, and decided, again, with these changes, is this campground allowed as a non-conforming use? And in order to do that, we had to look at the property, its use as a whole, not just the individual changes that were being made to it, but with these changes and the way the property is being used today, is it an allowed non-conforming use? And meeting those conditions, in my opinion, was instrumental in me saying, yes, that's true. And without those conditions being imposed on this application, then I have a question as to whether that non-conforming use is allowed.
But you're not supposed to look at it de novo again. You're not supposed to
I
look at it.
disagree.
You've already ascertained in the first application that you have a particular non-conforming use, and you've outline the parameters of it and put conditions on it to maintain it that way.
I think
what you're looking at are changes, and you want to see if those changes are still within the parameters of the first application. You're not supposed to put in new conditions, which is what you're doing in this application.
I think, let me try one more thing, and then I think we should ask the board what they want to do here. The only thing I'd ask you to consider is that what did we do I'm going to ask you to consider what we did in April, understanding that that's sort of contentious at the moment. But in April, we looked at a very specific applications to make physical changes to the campground. And had we restricted ourselves to considering each and every one of those individual changes, I think we wouldn't have looked at whether or not this non-conforming use was allowed. We wouldn't have come up with those conditions to begin with. We need to look at, each time we get a chance to look at Sandy Pines or another sensitive property like this, we need to look at whether or not its use currently is allowed. And that's what we did. It happens that it was almost exactly the same thing we did in April, but it was a new application, and we revisited that very important question because each time we get an application from Sandy Pines or a sensitive property like this, we are obliged to look at whether or not it is an expansion of use, and not just whether or not the individual changes are okay.
Well, I agree.
My
You're
opinion.
supposed to look at whether it's an expansion of use or a different use. But you don't go back and revisit the first application and start setting new conditions for the second application. You use the parameters you set in the first application and said, we decided this is the non-conforming use, and these are the conditions around it that it must be maintained this way. When you're looking at a new application that moves things around, you look to see if the changes fit in those parameters. And then it would be the same non-conforming use. You're not looking at it de novo all over again. And if you're going to put conditions like that in there, you have to put the whole LUO back in there. All the other parts of the LUO that go with it, or you're emphasizing the conditions.
Couldn't disagree more. I think we said up front and in the body of the findings that we meet the requirements of the LUO. And I think we did talk about that. I think that's well documented. And I don't think the fact that I didn't reiterate that as a condition is germane. Anyway, you can see why Nina and I didn't come to settle this.
Yes.
So I ask you to,
Okay.
to rule or to say
So I want
what
to
you
listen
want
to
to do.
the other folks here, but
Yeah.
it
Okay.
seems that certainly adding the 12 conditions again seems like a bit of overkill, because they have to, it's something they're already, we could mention them, you know, that they'll still comply with the conditions, but I don't see we have to reiterate them.
I feel like it does the same thing though, whether, I mean, just for our purposes.
As it happens in this case,
Yeah, it
because
does the
you
same
wrote them out
Right.
overtly.
Let me just mention, before, I've obviously thought about this a lot. When I asked Steve this question at the previous meeting, he didn't come here prepared to tick off the answers to those conditions. I think this puts it clearly that this board is going to look at whether or not applicants are continuing to be in compliance and look at the property as a whole and not just come in and tweak it. And I think it helps just keep it in front of us. I don't know.
But
I, for
you
one,
weren't in on the Masonic trick when we said, they didn't, you know, we basically rejected the Masons because they hadn't complied, they were already not in compliance with what they agreed to the last time. So now they're going even worse. And we just rejected them out of hand, which ended up getting bounced back to us.
Because you didn't put a reason in there. And then the board went back and looked at it de novo, which they could because it came back from the courts.
Right.
To look for a reason. And I think they made an erroneous decision, but that's beside the point. They at least revisited that. That was a different story.
Yeah.
Here, you know, it's not a matter of just complying with the conditions. Basically, the conditions have been set. And if they're not in compliance with the conditions, it's an enforcement issue.
Right, understood.
It's not for the
the-
board
the-
to keep saying, you better look at these, you better look at these.
I mean, the first
This
part
is,
of the
this is the
context-
findings of what we reviewed as a board and what we heard and what we decided. I think we talked about and reviewed and decided on each of these 12 conditions. And I've captured them.
You asked
As
for
part of these
an
discussions.
update on them to make sure that he was still in compliance with.
Because I believe we wouldn't have approved this without doing that.
Yeah, you asked for an update, but there's no reason to repeat them here. It's better to just say they remain in effect,
They remain in effect.
Whatever they may be.
whatever they may be. They will be the same. If you say they remain in effect, they will be the same in the first, from the first
All right,
application.
I think I've said,
Set them.
I think this is clearer. I think it makes it crystal clear. I don't see a reason, I don't think it adds confusion,
I think
but
it-
I think I've said what I need
Okay.
to say.
Well, I think it does add confusion, and it makes us sound like we're going back to the first application and confusing it with the improvements they put in, the second application, which just asks about the improvements, which should be just looked at with the LUO and the conditions to say, yep, meet the same parameters even though there's a change.
Yeah, the difference, I mean, the first application was baselining the world. We did not have a baseline. So we had to do everything. And,
You're saying because the board membership had changed?
no, because the Spangs never really came to the board, period.
Yeah, this had never been before the board, before the land use ordinance was written.
Right. So, this, I mean, I don't know that we need, that, this says every we already told them that they're gonna have to come back to us for other changes. Every time they come back for a change, I mean, I like the way that you detailed what was still in compliance, you know, they're still under 300, they've, you know, all of those types of issues were nicely in the body. I'm not sure that we need to, I guess I'll sign anything at this point, but I don't think I necessarily agree that we need to have the 12 conditions.
Well, my view is that each application stands on its own, and each application should have a set, or should have a set of conditions for that application. But I hear what Nina's saying, and it almost sounds like the application, which was submitted in this case, needed to be presented by the applicant as original application, comma, Rev 1, instead of a new application. I mean, so there's actually a difference in because I'm familiar with, you know, change orders and addendums, all that kind of stuff, and changes to contracts, but if we're considering applications to be standalone documents, then each application should be accompanied by its own set of conditions, even if those conditions are a copy-paste from a previous one. That's my view.
I agree.
Unless you want to call it application, in the application, you want to refer to a prior document.
Well, that's what we're saying, you just refer to the prior document and say these conditions still remain in effect.
But I think
as
the
well as
applicant has
the
to do that.
LUO.
Why doesn't the applicant has to present it that way? I don't think we should do that for him.
No,
If
the
it-
applicant doesn't present it, the board states that the conditions still remain in effect in their findings of fact.
Yeah, the findings are our document, not theirs.
Right,
Yeah.
I know.
I
But
mean,
the-
you can't say revision 1, because that would imply that you have continuing jurisdiction, and once you've signed the findings of fact and approved the first one, your jurisdiction is ended.
But the applicant could say application such and such Rev 1.
The applicant can say whatever they like, but basically, you have to take jurisdiction again on only the changes that were made. And you have something prior that sets the parameters, then basically you compare it to the parameters, which is not just the conditions, but the LUO. okay?
Oh, yeah, sure.
All the factors in the LUO. And then you say it meets that or it doesn't meet it. You don't have to repeat your parameters. They're already there in the first application. And if you say everything simply remains in effect, then
You're saying that we should, instead of reiterate them, we should say, refer to the conditions that were in the April document. We should link the two documents.
Yeah,
And
that's the
I find
issue.
that terribly confusing, cumbersome. Why not just repeat them?
If it's a
If they were clear enough,
if an application is a standalone document, it needs to have its own conditions,
and the findings are
and the
standalone.
findings are standalone.
I didn't want to reference
That's
the
my
old
view.
findings in this one,
because
except to allude to them. I didn't want them to make them part of the, the conditions.
well, then you overemphasize those conditions with respect to the LUO.
No, I don't- no,
And you
okay.
have the added problem of possibly making a mistake with them, or an omission. Each time you come up and you try to do that.
But we've looked carefully at them this time, right?
This time,
Yeah.
Having dealt with findings that, in my opinion, when I looked at them, contained an error, was problematic because at that point in time, it was done by a planning board that had, done these findings of fact 20 years ago. And so there was no mechanism to get that document back in front of the board to deal with an error. A, because, that board, was no longer here, and B, there just was no mechanism in which to deal with that. And so in this particular situation, the property owners were essentially stuck with the errors, and everybody, a number of folks involved agreed that, well, yeah, that was not correct, but unfortunately the minutes were in error, and the findings were consistent with the minutes. And so there was no mechanism to go back and deal with it. So I think the point of, what if you wind up with a mistake in there, later on down the line, at least what I've found has been extremely problematic in trying to rectify what folks believe to have been a mistake. But again, I don't think you have that here. I don't think you have that situation here.
but
But
if you
from,
continue to put in conditions each time they come back with a revision, you have the probability of doing it.
Higher probability.
I think just the opposite. I think it causes you to look at the conditions that you may be saying, well, you're inheriting, and to look at them once again in the fresh light of day.
Okay.
And that's what we've done here.
Well, suppose you want to
Are
change.
they still each and every?
Suppose they want to make a change that doesn't have anything to do with one of the conditions, and you want to change the condition. Do you have the right to do that? Because
No.
they're asking for changes. that don't
Absolutely not.
affect
I don't think we should, or allowed to, or should impose a condition that isn't germane to this application. We're certainly not gonna just put something down.
Right, but if you
These
want
are-
to be
these-
germane to this application, I don't think the word music was mentioned anywhere except in your conditions at the end.
No, absolutely not. This is, we looked at whether or not this was a non-conforming use or an expansion of a non-conforming use.
You're supposed to look at it in terms of what they want to do in this application compared to the parameters of the first application. Does it change the non-conforming use that we set up before? Does it change those conditions? Does it change, is there a change in the LUO?
You're saying we really should be linking the two.
No,
I think
I'm
there
saying
are
you should not.
two separate approaches. This is the way I'm hearing it. There's one piece that says you have an application. Does this application comply with land use ordinances? And does it comply with the conditions that were set forth originally for this particular property in this situation? And so we did that. The second thing the board did was, are you currently in compliance with these conditions that were set forth? Which is really an enforcement issue and not an issue of the board. The board's job, I believe, is just to consider the application on its face, and as part of that, it's meeting the land use regulations and the conditions that were set forth. But it would be nice to think that we could deny somebody based on their non-compliance with a particular set of things that were set out prior, but that's an enforcement issue, not a board issue, I think.
So you would say then, just, let me play
I would
back what I
reference-
just
I would
heard.
reference the earlier document.
Let me play back what I just heard. If you were to have had Mr. Doe tell you, no, we're not conforming to one or more of those conditions from before, you would still approve this application if you thought it had to do with music.
No, I think it's a good distinction. I think that it would probably, I would see the application as null and void, because it was not meeting the conditions that had been set out earlier.
Then I would offer that that condition is a condition of approval of this application.
Okay.
No, it would not be. It would still be a compliance issue.
It would be
That's the first one I brought up. When we had before us the Masonic Temple, we found out they were not in compliance with an earlier application. There was nothing we could do, because that's an enforcement issue.
Correct.
So
But
if you have a condition
You could
that
deny
isn't-
them.
No,
No, we can't.
No, we
did-
couldn't.
We got bounced back because we did deny.
I think you're walking a line here that is going to diminish the authority of the board, of this board. I think that's where you're talking about going.
no, the board does not have the authority to deny on a condition that an earlier board set, if it's not part of the new application.
But it is part of this application in that if they weren't doing that, it would be an expansion of a non-conforming use. And we had that discussion in spades in April.
Well, how would it be an expansion of a non-conforming use if they decided to have loud music? That has nothing to do with Section 8. If they decided to have loud music and weren't meeting the condition we set, and they came forward with the same application.
Because historically, this property has not had loud music. And we decided, due to input at the public hearing and extensive debate, that it was a requirement. And we levied it as a condition for this to be considered a non-expansion of a non-conforming use. And that
Once again, has nothing
is
to do
exactly
with
what,
this stuff.
It has nothing to do with the new application.
The new application is
I
jiggling around stuff.
I disagree. I think we're visiting
You
it.
cannot take that factor into effect if all they're
If-
asking for is something else.
If
I'd
they're
be-
asking
I'd be
for
willing
something
to-
else
I'd be
and they're
willing-
still, and they're playing loud music, Werner should be enforcing.
I'm not disagreeing with that, and that needs to be independent of whether they come to the board or not. But each time this comes to the board, I want to revisit. The board has the responsibility to revisit whether or not this
No, it doesn't.
property is an expansion of a non-conforming use.
No,
And I'd be-
it cannot take that excuse to go back and revisit an earlier application.
No, not an application. I don't want to revisit the earlier application. I just want to visit this application.
But that's an enforcement issue.
No, it's not
No.
an
Yes, it
enforcement
No, I
issue.
still think they're two different things. The enforcement would be if they're not meeting the requirements of the earlier application. That's an enforcement
Out of
issue.
sync with whatever's
But
going on at the board.
If they come along with an application next year, that they want to make some changes, but those changes would be in violation of what they had agreed to in the original application. They want to change the landscaping, let's say, landscaping. And it was going to alter the conditions that the board had put down. That application could then be denied based on that. But if they were also playing music, I don't think the board has the authority to deny that application based on some other condition that they're not meeting. That's still an enforcement issue.
Why did we put it in as a condition to begin with then? There was nothing in the April application that had to do with playing music. Nothing. It was just our visiting whether or not the Sandy Pines Campground in its current form, as it is being managed today, is an expansion of a grandfathered non-conforming use. And I think that's an important issue to revisit each and every time we look at an application from Sandy Pines Campground or any other similar property.
And I agree, to make certain that whatever they are applying for doesn't doesn't, I'm losing the word, but isn't in opposition to something that
no.
was agreed to in the original
I'm
application.
saying more than that. I'm saying more than that. I'm saying that the specific changes that are being asked for in the application need to be visited in light of how the property as a whole is being used, independent of the specific changes that are being asked for. And this item.
No.
Absolutely. I think you need to bring Amy Chow back in on this, because this is what I was advised very clearly by her last time, and this is the basis, in my opinion, of the conditions that we levied last time.
No, I think Amy needs to address this, because this is not the advice I got from the Maine municipal attorney. Clearly, you know, you can only look at those revisions, and
Basically, what, we have to form the question to Amy anyway, if you're gonna send it back to her. So what we wanna ask Amy is, on that particular finding of facts, either list the 12 conditions again, or just have a reference back to the previous finding of facts.
I have a quick question before we go down that road. What is the overarching concern regarding putting the conditions back in? What is the, trying to think of a good word for where I'm going with this question.
What does that hurt?
what's the
Yeah.
problem with putting?
Well, no, okay, so ultimately, talk about insurance. You say you're insuring something. This is just an example. You know, you look at a title issue and you say, okay, what's the risk? Is this an actual risk that could come to fruition that's going to cause a loss? Or is this a minimal risk where we're probably not going to see any type of loss in the future, if ever? So with your concern regarding the Masonic Temple and the parking lots and the past case law, what is the concern regarding including the conditions? What is the possibility of the risk associated with including those?
Okay, one, the first risk with it is that you're overemphasizing the conditions by putting them in. We made the parameters on the first application based on the factors in the LUO, and we set some conditions, but you also have an LUO with certain things that need to be met, lighting and so forth and so on, and the non-conforming use. The second concern is that,
Can I jump in on that first point? In my estimation, I understand there was obviously a lot of public debate surrounding the first application. Those conditions may be outside the board's jurisdiction to begin with, but we imposed them because the applicant agreed to them and because of the concern of the public, which I think remain important going forward, regardless. And with the evolution of the property, probably going to be evolving from its current state down the road, there's probably going to be several different evolutions to this property. I think those still remain important. And I don't want to minimize them.
no, you're not minimizing them. All I'm
What's
saying is
wrong
you're
with reinforcing them?
Emphasizing them by putting them in here. They're already in effect. You've already ascertained what they are.
So if they hadn't put the sign up for the kayak, or they hadn't used non-pesticides or you know, organic fertilizer or things of that nature to the improvements that they did previously, would you have approved this one? Because they're changing the landscape. They're, you know, altering the road. They're putting in new plantings. They're doing a lot of different things. Would you have approved this, knowing
The
that?
second application?
Yeah, this second one.
Well, the second application, I looked at not only the conditions, but the LUO as well. The parameters in there, the requirements, and all I'm saying is that you don't have a balance here. You don't have, basically, you're putting in the conditions again, but you're not putting in all the LUO factors that you looked at the same time. You're overemphasizing those conditions. You're only looking at some of them. You're overemphasizing those conditions. The second problem with them is that each time you put them in there, people have to ask the question, well, are the first ones basically not in effect then? can I ignore the first ones and just look at the second ones? What if there's an omission in there somewhere along the line, or a mistake, as Werner says, okay? Which one basically is in effect, which one is enforceable?
I agree.
know,
That's a concern
It's a
going
big
forward.
concern. You don't need to, all I'm saying is you don't need to, you can just refer to them, and that would be the way to de-emphasize them compared to the LUO. I don't say minimize them.
Yeah.
I just, what I'm asking for example, is in paragraph 11, I think besides saying things like, applicant affirmed to the board the campground has been and will continue to be in compliance with the 12 conditions, I would say with the LUO and the 12 conditions.
So what if we added that?
That would be fine, but I don't think you should repeat the conditions. I think there's too much of a possibility of error there, and I think you're overemphasizing those conditions.
So Nina,
That's all I'm saying.
so I have a question on this. So are you saying that for this kind of a test case here, in my view, that the finding of facts should have started out referring to the previous finding of facts, and then using that as the base document, and then building on that for this document? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, you just simply say that basically the conditions in the first application remain in effect.
In the first finding of facts, right?
Yeah, remain in effect. That's all you have to say. You don't have to repeat the conditions. And I have no problem approving this with the conditions in there. It's not the biggest deal in the world, but I'm concerned because sometimes I see the board starting to go look back at a first application when they shouldn't be, when they don't have jurisdiction, and obfuscating the first one with the second one. They should not be combined like there's a continuing jurisdiction. That's what I'm worried about, is the appearance of that, as it would go toward a court or something like that. Yeah, like I said, it's not the biggest deal in the world. We don't need to spend any more time on it. I'd be glad to approve this the way it is, but it concerns me a lot.
I get your concern. I think either way you do it, by referencing the prior findings of fact and the conditions in the prior findings of fact, or whether you just itemize them like Ed did in this one, to me it has the same effect. It may have a different effect to others, but this way I think provides a little more clarity, at least in my eyes. I understand we have a lot of history and background with the property and the prior application, but I get the jurisdictional concerns that you're seeing.
I think everybody wants the same thing.
Yeah, I don't have any problem signing them either.
Well, why don't
That's
we-
just me.
Make a motion?
Why don't we make a motion? Do you want to add the LUO and?
I thought that was a given, that we said that it meets the LUO. You're suggesting that if we,
Just one sentence, just add a little
Just,
bit
no,
to
just
that one item.
add to the
maybe.
sentence, just add to the sentence.
But maybe before we go any further,
this is crazy.
is it appropriate to ask Ralph if he has any concerns or questions about what we just discussed? Is it appropriate for him?
Go for it,
All right.
Ralph. What the heck?
Remembering that you might be sorry.
Yeah, okay. I didn't think so, but.
For the record, Ralph Austin, representing Sandy Pines. It is an interesting discussion you're having. I think it does call for perhaps after you hopefully vote for and sign this, that you do ask Amy Chow her opinion on that. I mean, I was going back and forth, and I can see Ed's point, I can see Nina's point. I'm not sure legally where, I mean, I'm used to finding a fact that does say the previous conditions are in effect. But I also see no problem in repeating them. Other than the risk of making a mistake, but I read very carefully as Ed was reading, and I'm sure Ed went through it very carefully.
We tried.
And in this case, there is no mistake. They are the same conditions, but trying to do that, yeah, it could increase the possibility of a mistake. to use a common phrase, we have no dog in this fight, other than it wouldn't be fair to the applicant to delay this 2 weeks over that issue.
Right.
No, I don't want to
Concur.
delay.
I mean, if it is something that we do reach out to Amy on, I mean, I have a feeling we're gonna be seeing Sandy Pines again in the future at some point, so it may be something that we at least have in our back pocket going forward,
Yeah. Yeah.
or the board has in their back pocket.
All right, somebody make a motion.
I'll make the motion to approve.
I'll second it.
Okay. No, you can't second it.
I can't say, oh, sorry, I'm sorry. Okay. That's right. Okay, Tom seconded it.
And I'm not going to second it.
All in favor?
Who seconded it?
Tom did.
Tom did.
All in favor?
All right.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Now, we'll motion to no.
Right.
Let's let poor Mr. Walsh, here, we thought with only 3 findings of facts that we'd be done well before this. But anyhow, we have,
Thank you.
somewhere here, item 181201, which is Aaron and Emily Cooper, represented by Walsh Engineering, and you're going to move rocks. So,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, Bill Walsh with Walsh Engineering, and that's exactly what we're doing. The Coopers are at 165 Kings Highway. The store's down here. As you go down, they're about halfway down the dead-end road on the left-hand side. They have a .2 acre parcel, and the seawall that is throughout Goose Rocks Beach, as we all know, runs in front of their home. This last March, as you all know, we had some pretty nasty storms. Where the Cooper's house faces the ocean, if you know the water out there, there are 2 nubs of rock out there. If you look straight out, they don't have the rocks in front of them. So when the storms came in last March, they hit this pretty hard. You can see some of these rocks here. There's one right there that was kind of a hanger. It was just kind of dangling there. We did last spring, we got a permit through Werner to go in and just touch it up and straighten it up because it really was a little dangerous. What happened where the waves hit it so hard that they dislodged those rocks, and they also sucked out some of the soil behind it. When this was built, they probably didn't have geotextile fabrics, and the geotextile fabrics helped the sand dune from being sort of sucked out from between the rocks. They had wave action that was up above the rocks here. This is pretty high too. This is probably 10 feet anyways, in this section of the beach. So the idea is to simply take the wall apart and put in where some of these larger or smaller stones are, to put in larger stones in their place. We're also going to put in, this is a cross-sectional detail of it. We're gonna put in a geotextile fabric, and we'll put in some smaller stones just to keep that geotextile fabric in place, and then replace some of the stones. We're gonna use as many as we can, but some of the smaller stones will be replaced by larger stones. The real issue here is just making sure we have big enough rock to stay in place with these waves. The bigger ones pretty much stayed in place here. The smaller ones got shoved around in those storm events. So it'll be taking it apart from property line to property line, taking it apart and doing it in sections. That's really our erosion control. I think we mentioned that in the letter. It's very hard to do any erosion control here on the beach because if you put anything in, it gets taken out every tide. So the way we manage it is we just do small sections of it at a time that can be put back in place during a tide cycle if needed. Some of the tide runs down here on a real high tide, it'll lap up against the base of that. So That's the plan.
How do you get the equipment needed to move those
To that,
down from the street, down to the waterfront?
they're gonna have to use the right-of-ways that exists down here to get down onto the beach and work from the beach.
And is there any specific erosion protection that's needed on those throughways for that type of equipment? I don't have a sense of what equipment it is, but I know they're
It'd
big
be a-
rocks.
Yeah, it would be track backhoes and some dump trucks. So I suppose,
So are they gonna is there damage to those right-of-ways by that equipment that needs to be guarded against?
I don't think you're gonna damage them because you're on sand. I think to your point, there's a possibility, I suppose, of tracking the sand out, as you come out, but
I just have no feel for
Yeah.
it or not.
that's probably the worst case scenario is if you were tracking it out. However,
Compacting it to the point where the grasses don't grow anymore, or this type of thing?
they're all sandy right of ways
Sand,
that
sand.
come in. Yeah, it's all sand. So it would just be that. I think, like I said, worst case is probably just tracking out the sand.
I have a question on an entirely different matter.
Sure.
The deed that you provided is not a recorded deed,
Okay.
and I'm wondering if there is a recorded
There is.
deed?
I looked it up when,
You did?
yeah,
Yeah, it's
Could we get a
referenced in
copy
the
of
tax
recorded
card.
one?
we can just give you the, I mean, it is, I looked at it, it is actually
Yeah,
the
it is.
same. It is.
I don't know why we have we must have gotten it before it was recorded.
16888, 9 page,
Oh,
that's book 16.
okay, hang on.
920 and 921.
1-6, York County, huh?
Yeah.
920.
I actually have a question along the same vein.
Sure.
The deed, so looking at the plans that you have, that you submitted, the deed describes, by meets and bounds, the parcel, right? And I'm assuming that's kind of the rectangular
Yes.
shaped portion.
Yes.
And obviously, the work you're doing is outside of that rectangular portion. It does describe, it says, together with all rights of grantor into the beach in front of said lot as was conveyed by a deed recorded at book and page. I was wondering if we could get a copy of that?
Of the survey?
No, well,
Or the previous
of
deed?
that previous deed,
Sure,
because it
absolutely.
obviously gives the owner certain rights to the beach, and I'm wondering if,
Yeah, this
Rocks,
was
they have
one
rights
of,
to the low water mark.
yeah.
well,
That it did read.
what
it
I'm
does
looking
read
at a
that way.
deed that gives them meets and bounds and which is a rectangle, not rights to that portion of property that you're wanting to do
Sure.
the work in. It's probably more just procedural,
Yeah.
but
Yeah, this is just a tie line, just so you know. That's
Yeah.
that's a tie line, just a survey line, so that it ties in the edges. Their property does extend.
right.
It extends towards the beach
Yeah,
somewhere.
somewhere. I'm
to
hoping
go too
maybe
far
that
down
deed,
that road,
that
but-
deed provides a little more clarity. and
Yes,
and
yes,
it's,
it
I
does.
want to see the 1610.
Okay, I can get that.
the other thing is that deed does reference a boundary survey from 2014.
We do have that.
Okay, I was
Yes.
wondering if we could get a copy of that.
Sure.
Because I know that the plans, they're helpful, but they're not technically boundary
Yep.
surveys. So
Yep. We do
having
have-
that, I think, would be
Yep.
helpful.
Yep, not a problem at all. We do
Okay.
have it. We worked on this project when they rebuilt it, and that we had the boundary done at that time.
Great.
How is it a rectangle?
So,
Is it from here?
bang, just right there. So this, I'm guessing, is,
Yeah, that's a tie line, that one closest to you down at the bottom, down here.
Oh,
This is just it's a survey line that's used in the survey world to tie
Yeah.
two properties together.
Yeah.
But it does in fact
it does go
extend
down.
I
Okay.
think they were part of.
I feel like that 2014 survey would probably be
It
really
does.
helpful.
Yep, I can
Okay.
absolutely provide that.
Just for curiosity, are they the only ones who need this little section? I mean, I see you're carefully keeping it to their.
And as part of that,
their piece.
the boulders don't fit on a nice straight line, so you're gonna be dislodging, moving things around on the abutting property. I'm just curious how that all works.
Yeah, you know, there's a little bit of edge there, obviously. You know, these people do have some issues. I just, on observation of me being out there, but,
But you'll keep to.
yeah, we have
The
to
property.
keep to those property lines.
And just so the board's aware, just, you know, on a practical note, I mean, we issue, maintenance and repair permits on a regular basis. You know, it seems like after every nor'easter, there's at least, a couple of folks that are coming in, where they're doing repair work, where they're just, where they're having equipment down that's picking up rocks that have come out of the wall onto the beach that they're picking up and just putting back into place. This one's just a bit more extensive than that, because it's a complete, pulling the wall completely apart, to put the geotech in the correct fashion and then putting it all back, which is why it's here. But it's a pretty common occurrence for us to,
Yeah.
to do the maintenance, and the repair permits that are
So-
of a much lesser scale.
I understood the question a little differently. Maybe I'll just re-ask it. Is there a coordination that's needed with the two abutters in terms of damaging or disturbing their wall?
We could ask for some sort of,
I'm just
construction.
asking what your normal practice is here. Just,
Yeah, I've worked on them both ways where we keep just inside the line and don't cross it, but I've done it the other way where we've gotten permission to,
You might end up with a better product that way and
Right.
maybe some additional business, or maybe you don't need any more business.
the biggest problem is where do you stop?
Of course.
Right?
Oh,
You
yeah.
know, you can keep chasing it, so that's the
Yeah.
struggle that we have
But
on all
it's
of these.
more than just maintenance. You're not putting rocks back up. You're taking rocks out and putting bigger rocks in.
Right.
And the fabric and everything else. Is that going to affect the water patterns in any way to the abutting properties?
Not in this case, because the walls
It's all just
exist
straight
there.
out,
Yeah. I mean, it would, this is gonna have less chance of washing out than that.
Right.
As you go forward into the future.
If you didn't do anything, would their chances be equal?
Probably, Coopers have done some maintenance, so they've tightened theirs up a little bit,
Could
I
someone
think.
argue that if you did this improvement, that somehow or other it harmed their property because you weren't eroding, so all the water went over there?
Because you make the ocean angry.
You may be-
Poseidon.
Well, Leslie,
Yeah.
plenty
Yeah.
of
I'm just asking, I really don't know.
You know, we run into this, this case is, that I don't see it as an issue because you have a wall, a continuous wall that moves along. Sometimes we're coming in and putting this in, and there's nothing here
Right.
and nothing here. The end conditions always get questionable, what happens there. This one doesn't concern me at all because we have that continual wall.
So for the stones that you're going to remove and not replace, you just take them to a landfill, or what do you do with them?
Yeah, they'll be taken off-site and probably brought to crushed or
Oh.
taken to a gravel,
Okay.
That's what Werner's telling us.
Those crushers are awesome.
aren't they? Oh,
Okay, how does replace with excavated beach sand work? So I'm looking at your detail here.
where did we say that? Oh,
Right there
That's
and
just- yeah, that's-
similarly down
what
below.
we end up doing is actually excavating down, so this is the beach levels right here. So
Okay.
we actually set these down into the beach. Believe it or not, this beach moves up and down.
Oh, I know.
By
Yeah.
feet. So we end up going down about, I don't know what we have to dimension there, from 8 down to about 4, so we're about 4 feet below grade.
Yeah.
So this is sort of the excavation, and then we're just putting the sand back down in front of it. Believe it or not, the ocean fills them right up in a big hurry.
I do beach profiling at the other end.
Oh, do you?
Those rocks,
Okay.
So I'm well aware of it.
Yep.
Okay.
I just have a couple other quick
Sure.
things. The authorization from the owner.
Yep.
Again, it's more procedural than anything else. The property is owned by the trustees of the trust, and the authorization was given by him individually.
Okay.
I don't think that's a huge issue, but maybe get an updated authorization from
I can
him
do
as
that.
trustee instead of individually.
Sure.
And just the other question I had, I know the existing layout is, there's steps or a walkway that goes down to the beach from
Yeah,
there? Are you putting it back in the exact same
Yes.
location? Okay,
Yep.
so
Yeah,
there's really no
there's
change to that?
There's a little bit of a pier right here, and then there's aluminum steps that they take in and out.
Oh, okay. All right. That was it.
Okay, so, see you on the 16th for a public hearing, I guess.
Sure.
And then, here's,
We have to rule the application.
we have to rule the application.
I'll make a motion to
Okay,
find the application
Second.
complete.
I'll second it, just subject to the receipt of the additional,
Yep, we'll get
the
those
deed
to
and
you.
the survey. Yeah,
okay,
second.
all right, in favor? Okay,
Great,
and as I said, 16th.
16th.
Public hearing.
great, thank you.
Okay. And I need,
Motion
take
to
it.
adjourn.
and Neil will take
No,
it
I haven't
before I
taken,
even.
I knew my
I
turn
just
was
smiled
up.
at him, but that was enough.
Ask a good question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You do it to yourself.
You ever
Very
seen one of those
good.
rock crushers?
Well,
No, I haven't.
can I hear another motion, perhaps?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor? Okay, we're off.
Huge metal wires and drag.